You don't have to know the future. Hey, it's Walter here, and you're at the Think Profit podcast, where we're going to help you develop a rock-solid trading confidence and avoid the potentially endless cycle of system switching. Right, Hugh?
That's right. We're going to help you develop a wealth mindset, develop a trading strategy that fits your core personality, and help you overcome the obstacles that stop over 90% of traders.
All right, Hugh, sounds good. You ready to go?
Yeah, let's do this.
Hey, Walter, let's talk a little bit about a kind of a weird subject maybe to a lot of people, but there's this idea that you can use so-called psychic abilities to trade and make money and do pretty well, actually. So what do you think about that? Do you think it's legit? Is it bunk, or do you have any experience with that?
My background is in psychology, and I am aware of studies in psychology where they, and I think we've talked about this before probably, or I mentioned this, but basically for those of you that maybe didn't see that episode, or listen to that episode, what they do is they take you and they put subjects, usually the subjects in psychology experiments are college students. They put you in front of a screen that has like a slideshow, and then in those slides they'll have like pictures of bunny rabbits and flowers and a day at the beach, and they'll have pictures of decapitated deer or whatever, right? Like it's really gruesome. And what they found was, because they measured the physiological response of the subjects in the study, they found that microseconds before subjects were presented with the gruesome stimuli, that they would actually react. In other words, they knew, and when they didn't react when they had the regular, the flowers, sunflowers or whatever, bunny rabbits and stuff, kittens and stuff, because that happened temporally before they were presented with the stimuli. It begs the question, why, right? Like, why would we have this ability to sort of react to something gruesome before we're actually presented with it, right? In that sense, I feel like, and everyone anecdotally probably has the idea of like, oh, you think about someone and then they call you, right after you think you have that thought of that person or whatever, and you just write it off as coincidence, or you say, well, I knew you were going to call, or I was just thinking of you, or whatever. But, the fact that we have data like this in the lab that suggests there's something going on here, and there are lots of other things as well. Sometimes people will just get a bad sense. Maybe if you're in tune to your intuition, you'll just get a bad sense about something, a day or whatever, a knock at the door or something like that. You just kind of know that something's going to happen. So there's that, right? There's data and anecdotal data, whatever. But lab data, I think, is pretty important stuff, and at least gets us in the conversation, right? The other thing is, you can go onto YouTube and find people who use psychics to pick like cryptocurrencies and stocks and things like that, right? Now, you could argue that, well, although these people, some of them have really good track records, using tarot cards or psychic abilities or whatever, you could also argue that, well, hey, the cryptos or the stocks have been on a really, until recently, as we record this, they've all been on a really big bull run. And so all that, the rising tide lifts all boats. So you could just throw a dart at a board and pick off a cryptocurrency is going to return 500%. You know what I mean? Like, you could argue that as well. And I understand that. But I think that the world and the universe is a little bit more bizarre than we give it credit for. And so I think as long as you're open to the idea, I feel like you should examine the data, right? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And the problem is, I guess, is as humans, we don't think scientifically, right? So we kind of think in terms of heuristics or mental shortcuts. So we think, well, this psychic is always right. And how did she know about my dead aunt? My aunt died last week. And how did the psychic know about that? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. There's also cold reading too. Like, you can go into a psychic and a very astute cold reader can understand and get your feedback on, and they're always kind of like peppering you with ideas, and they wait for you to bite, and then they go down that road, right? That's what cold readers are really good at. They're really good at that. And I learned that cold reading stuff, as a magician, growing up reading all these magic books. Cold reading was one of the things that they get into in mentalism. When you learn mentalism, which is like how to, predict the future or read someone's mind or whatever, that stuff, there's cold reading throughout that. So I kind of, I have a little bit of a background in that as well. So I will say that I think there are lucky people that claim to be psychic or using the woo-ness There are also probably real psychics. Like I read, there was a woman, what's her name? She's dead now, but she wrote a book, and she was like a really famous psychic in the 90s. Anyway, she's Sylvia Brown, that's her name. Anyway, she wrote a book, and it was like in 2006 or something, right? And she talked, and she nailed the pandemic that we recently went through. Like she literally like nailed it all the way down. She got everything right about it. And that was in 2006, you know, so you kind of think, and there are lots of examples like that, right? And people say, oh, you know, the skeptics will say, and by the way, skeptic is the wrong term. People say skeptics, but skeptics are just supposed to be people that critically question things, right? They're not supposed to be debunkers. Today, what we call a skeptic is a debunker. So they're professional debunkers. They're called in to make sure that everyone stays in the line and they don't believe the woo stuff, right? Like that's what a skeptic is today. But in the old days, if you actually look at the root word, a skeptic is just someone who thinks critically. That's all it is. Basically a scientist. But anyway, so I would say that I think there's probably something out there. We have some data to suggest that. In some of the like sort of off-piste, off-mainstream journals in psychology, you can find a lot of research in this area. It never really, I shouldn't say never, but it usually gets published in the lower tier journals and what, you know, academics would scoff at major institutions. But that's just simply because it doesn't get accepted at the major journals. It's not like they haven't tried, right? So my thought is, I think you can do things like that. I've tested different supplements that were supposedly, and I didn't find any value in those, that were supposedly able to give you some sort of, a bump or whatever in your ability. But the reality is, as a trader, and I'll leave and I'll stop talking. The last thing I want to say is the reality is, as a trader, you don't have to know the future, right? To benefit from moves in the market. You don't. As a trend follower is literally someone who follows trends. So the trend starts and you follow it. And this is one of the things I've been talking about with one of my coaching students this week is, you know, he's really interested in trying to figure out, how do I get in the trend early? And my response is, you don't need to. Like the best trend followers just take a bite out of the middle. So if the trends, you know what I mean? If the trend's going up, you just need to get in here and get out here. And who cares about the beginning bit and the end bit? Who cares? Just get a big chunk out of the middle. And that's what all really good trend followers do. So I think these ideas of predicting the future and that sort of thing is probably misguided and not really necessary in trading. So those are my thoughts, basically. What are you thinking? Yeah. I mean, I know you've been in this world a bit.
Yeah. No, I so back in like junior high or whatever, we went on a soccer trip. There was one game that I didn't play, so I was super pissed about that. And that night I had a dream that I was going to score a goal the next day. And the next day I scored that goal in the exact same way that I dreamt about it. So I know that there's something there. And now that's the only time that's ever happened. So it's obviously not like a reliable thing, right? But I think there's obviously something there, and it may come to us maybe when we need it most, or when we're emotionally charged or something like that. But it doesn't appear to be like something that's super reliable. And I looked into like some of the remote viewing stuff, right, that the government agencies did and Stanford did, and they used one remote viewing method to play the futures market. I think they tripled or quadrupled an account or something within like 6 months. So it can potentially be used for, trading, but I don't think, or at least to me, it doesn't seem that it's that reliable. And they did another study later on with more money from an investor, but then that blew out. So there's also it seems like there's some sort of rules behind using that kind of power, or there's some sort of limitations, or, that study was just meant to progress the idea of using psychic powers, but not necessarily make money. So I think that's kind of, at least from where I stand, that's what it looks like. Everybody has some sort of ability, but when it comes to making money, that's kind of a dicey area that's maybe not as reliable. So that's what I think about it. And like you said, again, it's trading actually is more about practice and repetition, like playing any sport or whatever, right? So there's going to be little intuitions, but I think a lot of those intuitions are more based on your experience sitting in front of the charts and doing things over and over again and seeing different patterns, and not so much as like a pure like psychic power or whatever. It's more about the repetitions and the strategy that you create.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you have to decide it's like anything like in life, you have to decide, is it worth my time?
Mhm.
Right? You know what I mean? Like you can get really deep into it. And like when I remember when I was just reading all the technical analysis books, and you get into that GAN section of the library, right? And you start getting really deep. And I did, and then at a certain point you just go, do I really need this? Like, is it, I mean, this looks like it's going to take a lot of time for me to make a little bit of like, gains in this area. So do I really want to go down here? And in the end, I just decided, you know what? I can just use point and figure charts. Like that was, well, that was one of the cool things that came out of GAN was when I was in that area was that I can just literally just draw point and figure charts, right? Which is one of the things I learned in that whole foray into GAN. So yeah, so I mean, but for some people, that's where they are. They're comfortable and they want to be in that area. But I just feel like you're right. I feel like there could be limited gains. And for people who are interested, you reminded me about the remote viewing stuff. Well, I can put a link down for people who are interested. There is a group that does remote viewing for the crypto markets. And if you guys are interested in that, you can go and learn more about that. They have a YouTube channel and a Patreon and all that. But and there are lots of other ones out there that use psychics or stuff like that if that's what you want to do. But yeah, I mean, everyone has these precognitive dreams, right? Those are pretty common. That you had, like a lot of people can raise their hand and say, oh yeah, this happened to me or my friend or my brother or whatever. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that it seems like there's some sort of either we're aware of what's coming if it's really important, or time is in some way not as linear as we think. There's something going on there, right?
Yeah, I think what's his name, Ingo Swann, said something interesting once that made me think. He said, if the future didn't already happen, how can we see it from right now? And I was like, yeah, I mean, that's one thing to consider. Maybe it has happened already and we're just seeing it, seeing something that happened already. Who knows?
Yeah, that's a good quote. Yeah, that's a great quote. Yeah.
All right, cool. Thanks, Walter.
Thanks.
All information in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not trading or investment advice.